Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by the whole Beavers Edge crew. We'll start with senior writer Ryan Harlan there on your far side. And then for his first podcast, Brogan Slaughter joining us. You guys have seen him at some Oregon State football practices. Glad to have him jump on the podcast. We got the full Edge crew today. Excited to be talking to you guys. We got a lot to cover here on today's edition of the Edge podcast and want to go ahead and wrap it up because it's such a beautiful day here in the Pacific Northwest. Don't want to be inside for too long today. So definitely make sure to get outside and enjoy this nice weather. But guys, talk about a spring. I mean, it's gone by so fast. Spring football's already in the rear view. We're already looking ahead to fall camp. Feels like March and April just went like that. We've got Beaver baseball chasing down a national seed and has a huge series against Oregon on the road this weekend. So much to get into on the podcast. Looking forward to discussing it all with you guys. But let's start off with Ryan, and then we'll get into Brogan. But Ryan, what's going on, man? How are you? How's the adjustment to baseball going for you, my man?
It's been good. I will say this, don't try and cover a baseball game while slightly concussed from a concert. But hey, we survived and that's all that matters, right? Like, so I can't complain.
For the record, we do prioritize health at Beaver's Edge. When I learned of Ryan said slight concussion, I said, hey, it's all good. We can cover Tuesday's baseball. But, Ryan being the legend he is, like, nah, man, I got Jordan flu game. We're going to tough it out. We're going to get the recap, get the vids, and it was great, man. But good to hear
Yeah.
you're doing better. Brogan, how about
No,
yourself, man?
of course.
How's spring term treating you? And
It's been
how was your
good.
first taste of football, man? Obviously, you got to experience everything in April. Got to go to a handful of practices. Got to learn the Beaver's Edge way, and hopefully bug Ryan a little bit.
Yeah, did just a little bit in the fall, so got a little preview, but the spring was kind of the first getting fully into the swing of things. But I had a great time. It was fun. Weather was nice. Doing well on the school side of things, getting to week 4, just getting into these first midterms. So balancing that and having a great time overall, honestly.
Always a good time of year when that midterm season rolls around, Ryan. Those first couple weeks, you're like, it's spring. It's so nice. Then you're like, oh yeah, no, got a few more weeks of school to get through. So I totally get that. But no, it's been great, guys, and you guys did great work this spring. And I would highly encourage everyone to check on over at BeaversEdge.com. We still got our spring football HQ up on the front page. You can see everything we did from the month. You want to know everything that happened on that turf this spring. We've got it covered at BeaversEdge.com. Detailed reports and all that. But we'll go ahead and start before we dive into spring football, the spring game, then ultimately get into baseball a bit later. We'll go ahead and start with a little bit of breaking news this morning, and that was the first kind of transfer portal domino to fall post spring game. Ryan, that was Montreal Hatton, former wide receiver turned running back, somebody that all three of us were really kind of excited about his potential, bringing a different element to the running back room. Setting the stage a little bit coming into the spring. The Beavers had Anthony Hankerson, Saladin Law, and Cornell Hatcher and Jake Reichel at the running back position. But as spring went on, we saw less and less of a run for Anthony Hankerson, which was to be expected considering his veteran status. And then even as spring went on too, we saw a little bit less of Saladin Law and maybe more of Cornell Hatcher and Jake Reichel. And you kind of could tell they needed a little bit more depth there. So they brought in Montreal Hatton over from receiver. He wasn't seeing a ton of reps there, and he kind of had a little bit of a bigger frame. I believe it was like 5'11", 215. And, he kind of carved out a wide back role. And I want to kick it over to you guys to kind of talk a little bit about what his role was specifically that you saw. But the long story short of it is, I wrote about this in our 3-2-1 post spring game. There was going to be a numbers problem, and that was when you look at all four of those guys we mentioned. Hank, Allah, Hatcher, and Reichel are all going to be back this next year. Plus, you've got 2 incoming freshmen in Cordy Glass and Skylar Jackson, who I think the coaching staff and a lot of fans are really excited for. So when you add 6 guys to a room, and then you kind of saw that Montreal's prospects weren't super great immediately if he moved back to wide receiver. The decision makes sense. I got a ton of respect for the kid, especially getting moved around positions, and I wish him all the best. But when you kind of dive into it from that perspective, it makes sense. But Ryan, let's start with you. What did you kind of see from that role? And we even talked to Gundy about it a little bit post spring game, and he seemed kind of intrigued about it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was at too when I first saw the move over there, kind of a Debo Samuel-esque type of role. And Hatton looked like a natural fit at the running back position, at least from his vision and few kind of runs that he had with third team offense in spring practices, and then had some had some good plays in the spring game as well too. On top of that, so he has good vision. He has the ability to be a running back at this level. That's definitely for sure. And I think a lot of what Gundy saw in that move and asking him to come over to the running backs room from the wide receivers was a big thing in that. But yeah, I think when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, with numbers in the running back room, the incoming numbers that are coming in, and then already the numbers that you have in the wide receiver room, um, I don't fault Hatton at all for looking for somewhere else, because either way, like, he would have been buried deep down on the depth chart, and if he was still on the roster as a wide back role, he'd probably be mainly more of a gadget guy than anything else. And I don't think he really wants that for him and trying to maximize the most of his opportunities playing in college. So if you're buried and you're not going to see a lot of time, yeah, I don't fault him.
Brogan, what are your thoughts? What'd you see out of him? And did the move kind of surprise you a little bit?
Some agreement with Ryan there. I thought he performed really well in the role they slotted him in. They threw him a lot of passes out of the backfield and ran him in a really unique role that nobody else really filled in the spring. And I was excited. I really kind of think I termed like the Debo Samuel-esque role for him. And I was really excited to see that come to fruition in the fall. But also, like Ryan said, the receiver room, really deep. A lot of guys that have been here, been on the roster, just getting more experience, getting older. Not a lot of room to kind of work yourself in there. And the running back room is also pretty solidified. Like you guys said, two studs coming in the fall. Just not sure if the opportunity was going to be there for him.
Yeah, no, I think that's ultimately what it came down to and why it's intriguing. And like Ryan said, I think gadget situation might have been probably where he was trending because again, we talked about it, I think, just looking at like other guys, like when you have someone like Malachi Durant, who was a freshman this last year, who's already kind of risen above where Hatton is, and when you have guys younger than you starting to rise up you in the receiver room, that's tough. And but the same token, I want to make sure to exemplify again. I got a ton of respect for this kid because, from what we heard, he handled the move to running back with like bells on kind of a situation. And Gundy even mentioned to us, that post spring game that, not everybody has like the sure, coach, absolutely mentality of wanting to, be moved positions. They're like, hey, I've been a receiver forever. So I think that just shows kind of the teammate that he was. And I got a lot of respect for that, especially for, the culture that Oregon State has. So obviously that's the first news. As far as portal goes, the good news for Beaver fans listening. I really wouldn't expect a whole lot of major, departures in that regard. We've kind of talked about it a little bit behind the scenes. We've teased it on the damn board. Again, if you're not on the damn board, get on the damn board. BeaversEdge.com is where we all talk about, stuff like this that's not always public on social media and those things. But like, for the most part, I really don't think the Beavers have to worry wholesale about big time guys leaving. Ryan, you kind of mentioned there could be possibility of some guys that maybe didn't see extended run in spring, maybe look to find a different situation for more playing time. But as it stands, I know we've seen on the board a few Beaver fans be like, well, we're a little gun shy, the portal, it could still happen, all those things. And I get that because the portal giveth as much as it taketh. But barring something massively unforeseen, I wouldn't expect any of the major contributors this season to enter the portal. Or at least between
Yeah.
now and the start of the season. Sorry.
Yeah, likewise on that. Like, my biggest expectation was really guys that were buried down on the depth chart would be the ones to enter. And I think Bray also said too, post spring game, that he wants to keep everybody around. He doesn't want massive roster turnover. And so if you can do that, and yeah, you lose a bit of depth on the outer edges of some position groups, I call that a success, all things considered, in this day and age with the transfer portal. They might bring in a couple guys as well, in addition to the two guys that they already brought in from the transfer portal. So there's probably going to be some just kind of solidifying some positions with some guys that are currently in the transfer portal as of now, but everything probably will be set in stone for the most part in terms of personnel come fall camp.
To that point, I mean, another thing just as well, considering that, Ryan, is I wonder also if Montreal's decision was anything related to numbers as we start to get closer. Because again, I don't know when the exact date is, but it's coming. Whether it's at beginning of August, end of August, whatever it is, the 105 limit is going to be the 105 limit this academic season. So the old 85 scholarships is now kind of null and void, and it's just 105 guys on your football team. So again, somebody who was a former walk-on like Jake Reichel, I'm curious to see kind of what happens there. There are a handful of walk-ons. We saw it with the offensive line. Maybe less so at certain positions than we've seen in the past, but there are still some walk-ons who will kind of be folded into quote full, team spots this next year, but you won't be able to go over 105 no matter what. And, we talk about the day after the spring game, landing Georgia State offensive line transfer Will Larkins, and then you add James Madison, DB transfer Tyjae Hopper. So those two more guys coming in, and we're going to be obviously looking at numbers, but, compared to seasons past, Ryan, obviously where you have to stay firm to the 85, but then you can have as many walk-ons as your heart pleases. It's going to be an adjustment. I know it's from what I've heard, it's going to be less of an adjustment for Oregon State and more of an adjustment for maybe some of those enormous schools who would stack 85 scholarships and then have a lot of preferred walk-ons who had really good NIL packages, if you know what I mean, to kind of, make them almost scholarship guys. I don't think it'll be quite as much of a detriment in Oregon State because they pretty much did have 85 guys, but those numbers are going to be interesting because it means you can really only hold about 20 walk-ons, but that are, I know why I keep saying walk-on, 20 extra guys, so to speak.
Yeah, and even too, I'm curious to see how that affects special teams, especially because you
Right.
carry, backups as well too, and that's something where I wonder what that's going to look like whenever that roster limit does get implemented.
Right. So we'll be looking for some more clarity on that as well. But again, that was something that Trent Bray teased to us. He literally is, he knew, Ryan. He came to spring interviews. He's like, well, there might be a couple more players who join the fold. And then boom, boom, not even 24 hours later, I think it was Brogan because we were together at the time. He's like, did you see the Georgia State transfer? Did you see the James Madison transfer? Bray spoke it into existence. And I'm like, that tells me that they still wanted the DB depth surprised me a little bit because that room is pretty darn good, but maybe just someone to fill Jack Kane's spot, and then offensive line, that pretty case in point as to why they'd like to have another body in there, and we'll talk about that here briefly.
Yeah, that was one where the offensive line didn't really surprise me. The defensive back room, either to fill someone's spot, as you mentioned, or I think they expect somebody to not be available. Either as to who that is, I'll probably do some digging around, figure that out. But that's definitely my kind of inclination when I first saw that move myself. And I think even too, like it's not a bad problem to have either, to have a lot of depth in that DB room, adding to that as well
Right.
and raising the ceiling of that room, because we saw it last year with the lack
It
of
was
depth at
tough.
the DB room, and it was tough for some of those guys that were thrown out there,
It is.
like Asai Vinderwale, but those those experiences being out there and going, into the deep end this past year has paid
Yeah.
off big time. But
So my
that's another thing for that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. My question for you with that, Ryan, do you think we need to monitor just two guys that come right off the bat? Kobe Singleton, Noble Thomas. Are those two guys that you think we need to monitor and can't say for 100% certainty they'll be good to go, or hard to say still? Because we didn't see those guys really. We didn't see. We really didn't. We didn't.
Yeah, I think those two guys are definitely there. TJ Crandall, I know towards the end of spring didn't
Mm,
practice for an undisclosed reason.
right.
As to
Yeah.
what that might be,
Good
I
point.
think he should be fine by fall camp. That's another guy that definitely will be a big contributor in that secondary. And then even Drake Vickers too, who
Mm,
had a strong spring, and Brogan can attest to that as well. He didn't
sure.
practice towards the end as well either. So I think those are probably the four guys there that we should probably keep an eye on and
Fair
see
enough.
what
Yeah.
their status looks like headed into this season
No,
and
that's
into fall
really
camp.
No, that's really good. And I'm curious, Brogan, just your thoughts because I know one of your favorite guys. And let's just transition this and move over to we just gonna talk about positions that we like the most and a position that we think needs some work, coming out of spring. And I want to get your thoughts overall, Brogan, just on the DB room and particularly Trey Glasper, because we're sitting here talking about guys who maybe won't be 100% come fall camp potentially. We'll see how all that goes. But one guy who was 100% and played with his hair on fire all spring long, Trey Glasper. Brogan, he's younger than you. He sure didn't look like it out there. Just talk about that kid. I mean, he should be in high school. He should be getting ready to go to prom right now. And arguably, you could make the case, maybe not the top three most impressive defensive backs in the spring, and that's not going against third team and scout team. That's going against like Trent Walker and Darius Clemens. So tell me what you saw from him, Mogs.
Yeah, absolutely. Trey Glasper and I believe Zeph and Walker too, early enrollees in the DB room, and she's a strong room overall. But in the spring, we saw with the injuries to Kobe Singleton and whatnot, they were moving guys around a lot in the slot who they were guarding. And Trey Glasper, after about the first week of spring, like you said, he was on Trent Walker, he was on Darius Clemens, and he was holding his own, especially like you said, as the young guy versus the guy who led our team in catches and receiving last year. He held his own and he played with some fire and just with some spunk. And it was really exciting to see from the young guy. And I'm super excited to see what he does in the fall.
Defensive back, your most impressive position in the spring, or do you have another one that you liked?
I would have to say defensive back. I just think the amount of bodies that you can throw in there and rotate at the nickel, at the safety, at the corner, there's just too many guys for it not to be a good group come the fall.
For
Really
Beaver,
impressed with DBs.
yeah, for Beaver fans, Brogan, and that were critical of the secondary group last year, and and as Ryan mentioned, the depth issues. What would you say to them going into this year, if having seen an entire spring now?
I just say stay tuned. I think most of the guys in the DB room, they're the same players. They're more experienced. They've gotten older. Got rid of some of the kinks in the hose that were happened last year, and they're big bodies. We got tall guys. We got 6'3" guys that can fly with the Zach Cards of the world. So I think they're going to be able to cover a lot of schemes that we see this coming fall, and I think they're going to lock it down.
Yeah, I was gonna say speaking of Glasper and Card, that was one of the highlight plays from spring where Glasper kept up with Card nearly stride for stride. Like that is impressive, and that also speaks to how good of a football player he is. I know Rod Chance raved about him when we talked to him post game, and Chance was saying that like yeah, like at the next level, Glasper could have been a D1 wide receiver. But he's like, we're fortunate that he's playing defensive back for us.
Right.
And I know he shared a fun anecdote of Malik Murphy when he first got onto campus, throwing footballs around to the guys, starting to get to know everybody, and he started throwing to Glasper and was like, "Hey, I want this guy to play receiver." And Chance was like, "No, no, 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 hands off him, hands off him. That's my guy. Like
Yeah.
he should be picking passes off of you, not catching them." So like he's definitely doesn't look like a freshman out on the field. Like, and that's somebody that I keep bringing up every single time I talk about like guys who stood out to me every single practice. And Glasper, yeah, just immediately jumped right off the page and on really like day one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure, and I'm curious, Ryan, because I've got my position that I want to highlight as well, but we'll get to the positions we are critical of because I have a sneaking suspicion we're all going to say the same thing. But Ryan, as far as your position group that impressed you, was it DB? Was it another spot? What position group kind of stood above to you compared to just again? I put everything in the context of Ryan. Imagine you're a Beaver fan who kind of checked out during the last, few weeks of the season last year, and you're looking for optimism coming into this year, which I think there's oodles of it. I think there are lots of reasons to be optimistic. What position group do you think made the biggest leap from like the dog days of the end of last season to now?
Outside linebackers, by far. Yeah, DB's definitely improved, but outside linebackers especially, a lot more depth there as well. Andy Alfieri now full time over there looks a lot better, a lot more comfortable in that role, and you can thank him coming over mid-season
Hmm.
in on the defensive side of the ball to play that position for that help as well. But they add to that room with Walker Harris, Kai Wallen, Nico Taylor returns for another year. That group has looked really good, and even along the defensive front too, with both tackles when they're rushing four, albeit it's spring, they're practicing against themselves, so it's only practice. We're talking about practice, but they look a lot better. Like they look a lot more consistent. There's a lot more depth there. It's only a matter now of like, can this group carry over this strong performance when everybody on the offensive line, especially that first team offensive line, is
Hmm.
practicing? That's really the biggest thing I want to see out of them. But they look a lot better and definitely look like they can, at least get home to the quarterback much more consistently than they did this past year. And I know that was a point of strife for a lot of Beaver fans as well. It's just like, yeah, when you're letting San Jose State's quarterback, not their starter, but their second string quarterback, sit in the pocket for 5 to 6 seconds
We
and
counted.
chuck a
Yeah.
ball over your head, that's not good. That's
Yeah.
not good. Like
No, I
plain
mean
and simple, that's not good. But they
yeah.
look a lot better in
Oh,
terms of being able to confuse what the offensive line is doing, the stunts that they're running, being able to get pressure too with not just them, but also bringing a DB down and rushing five or six guys.
right. No, I think no, I totally wholeheartedly agree. I think that position and an extension of that, Ryan, the defensive line. Like when you consider like again, I know the offensive line's going to get JT Hand, Jacob Strand, Tyler Morano, Van Wells, Keon Cox. Anyone I miss, Ryan? Like that's a big. I'm like that whole. That's
Jacob,
basic.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, Jacob Trent,
Tyler
Tyler
Bolton is
Bolton, yeah,
yes as
yeah.
well. Just 3 to 4 guys who could compete for a starting job. It's almost like you're getting a first team offensive line, back. So I think that's kind of an incomplete. But on the flip side, guys, the defensive line got pressure. They didn't have Nick Norris. They didn't have Takari Hickle.
Kels
Thomas
Howard too.
Kels Howard. Thomas Collins was pretty light. I remember him. He did a little bit early, but not so much late. Um, and then then you add in Jesse Myers, Nicholas Fisher coming in the like. I think the defense like bodies will not be a problem this year. Knock on some wood, unless you have something absolutely catastrophic happen. You combine the returning with the growth with the guys who were experienced like Nick Norris and Takari Hickle. I think that group's going to be fantastic. But don't want to cheat and grab yours, Ryan. I'm going to go cliche and take a little shot. I think it's easily bar none quarterback. You want to know why? Because the guy who's a starting quarterback for you this year is a starting quarterback, and maybe just to further illustrate, the guy who was your starting quarterback last year is on his second transfer since leaving Oregon State. So, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say the quarterback talent, and again, I'm not trying to take too many shots at Giovanni McCoy, but I think the overall talent of the room is just it's been drastically upgraded. And I think Giovanni McCoy did the best that he could considering. But I think it was an incomplete. I don't think he was the right fit at the right time kind of a thing. And some other, maybe didn't have all the best pieces around him and all the, for whatever reason it was. But considering that McCoy went to Texas State and now finds himself at Temple after not finding the field at Texas State, I think it's pretty clear. Oregon State needed to upgrade at the quarterback position, and they did. Malik Murphy is a dog. He's a stud. He's going to make all the throws on the field. You got to dial in the little things like chemistry and timing and all those things, and that's all got to be worked on. But the bottom line is, folks, this is a guy who almost threw for 3,000 yards and, threw for a whole bunch of touchdowns against a pretty small amount of interceptions, relatively. So I think, you build off of what he did at Duke, and I think we've learned, guys, the last couple years, the rest of your team, you can sometimes have guys who play above their talent levels and you just have a great season. You need a dog at quarterback. We've learned this, right? You need a dude to come to even be like, hey, we're gonna go challenge for the college football playoff, right? this last year, Indiana was a great team. Indiana's quarterback was a dude, right? You just need a dude. I think back to a couple years ago when it was the Bo Nix and Michael Penix battles here in the Pac-12, and it was like those two guys were, just dudes. And, I think Oregon State has a legit guy under center now and a legit guy who can, the quarterback can't be an excuse anymore. That's how I look at it. The quarterback's not an excuse. We heard it all this last year. That's why that so now I think it comes on to my biggest thing, if it's not the offensive line, and I'll kick it to you guys after this, which offensive line's got some issues, but I think once they get healthy, it'll be much better and the depth will be there. My thing is the receivers have to prove it this year that aren't named Trent Walker. I mean, you go back and look at the stats last year, say who you will about who was throwing the ball or whatever. But when you look at Trent Walker's 1,000 yards and then you take out Jermaine Terry and you realize the receivers all about 200 yards apiece, that's not gonna get it done. So I'm putting my pressure is I want to see the receivers. Murphy is the guy. He can make the throws. Can the receivers create separation, get open, make those plays that then you're like, wow, look at all this room Oregon State has to run the ball because of how great the passing game is. So that's kind of my challenge there. I want to see the receivers, consistently be a good group for them next year. So kicking over to you guys, I'm assuming you guys will both take a look at offensive line, but let's start with you, Brogan. What position group needs to hit it the most this offseason?
Yeah, well, just on a little addition to what you were saying, I think Jabari Johnson's about as good of a QB2 as you could have.
He's grown a lot.
He's always been agile. He can scramble. He's really quick, but his improvements as a passer, especially this spring, has been leaps and bounds. So barring anything were to happen to Murphy, I think we'd be in a good spot too. But switching over to like the improvement, I liked a lot what you said about the D line and needing that production. I think we have the guys. I think we have the athletes, especially with Nico Taylor coming back, Kai Whalen, Walker Harris, a lot of those guys, Andy Alfieri. But I need to see the sacks. I need to see the pressure. No more Walker Eget, Dylan Gabriel, just standing around all day, dancing around. Can't have that anymore. So D-line, I want to see the production there. And then I was just going to say inside linebackers. We had both of our starting inside linebackers transfer away in the offseason. Dexter Foster, young guy, really, really talented, but I just want to see him, start a full season, play, see how he grows into that role. And then Micaiah Tongue, I really want to see him just play a full healthy year. Just no injuries. I just want to see him get on the field and make plays like we know we all can. So inside linebackers and D-line, I want to see that production just really show up. In terms of O-line, I think Ryan's got that handled a little better.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and just to your point too, I also want to make note of Callan Guttridge, who, pride of Wilsonville, Oregon. Brogan and I being Sherwood guys, gotta give Callan his flowers despite being a Wilsonville guy, but he's played really good this spring, as far as where he is as a redshirt freshman. And then once Tristan Taia joins the fold over the summer, I think that's going to be a solid QB room. But Ryan, just to kind of wrap up football so we leave a little bit of time for baseball, same thing for you. You kind of think the offensive line needs to be, kind of the biggest group of improvement this summer?
Yeah, that's definitely it. I mean, I know saying like what the performance was of the offensive line in spring had a lot of people concerned, and I totally get that. But also, too, it's like we said with the amount of guys that they had out, it's like you have an entire first team offensive line out. So you're not going to get a good read on this group. Like, you do not use the spring game to judge them at all. Like, if the issues that are plaguing them in spring carry over in a fall camp, that's when you should be concerned overall. But yeah, that's definitely what I want to see. Just the chemistry together, how Coach Cav brings those guys up to speed and gel those five guys along the line that we'll see a lot of time this season. So just kind of just seeing what Cav does with that group of five and being able to do that. So that's my biggest thing in terms of being able to see some improvement there.
Absolutely. And again, we'll be talking more spring football, throughout obviously the summer between Ryan, me, and Brogan, getting you guys ready for August and fall camp we'll blink, folks, and it'll be here. Don't you worry as we're approaching May. But we're going to save the last 9 minutes or so on the podcast. We've got to talk your Beaver baseball, folks. I mean, 32-7, Beavers have won 12 in a row. I remember telling these guys when we were hanging out the spring game on Saturday, after they lost that game to UC Irvine 12-0, and it was bad. Like I said, Ryan was there. He
I
was,
was there. It was terrible. It was one
and
of the worst baseball games I've ever seen them play in my time covering the team. It
yeah.
was, yeah, it was just uncharacteristically bad.
And
Yeah.
for them to, again, I don't know what lit a fire, but basically it was like, all right, it was like Jordan, right? Where it's like, you got my attention now kind of a thing. Because the Beavers had proceeded to win the series against Irvine, uh, grab more non-conference wins along the way, sweep Fullerton, sweep Cal State Northridge, and now just take out Gonzaga this week. Brogan saw an extra inning game on Monday. Gonzaga tried to take it down, and then Tuesday, Oregon State put the hammer down. Less more that I want to talk about those previous games, guys, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I want to talk about what's ahead and now where this team stands, because we all know the best path and the path that we've seen for Oregon State going to Omaha in history's past when they've won it. It's being a national seed. If it's not being a national seed, it's been when they have gotten super regionals at Goss. But Oregon State has not made Omaha in the modern era without having super regionals at Goss. I'm not saying it can't happen, but you want it to happen. And it just, if you can guarantee home field advantage at Goss Stadium leading your way to Omaha, I think you've got a fighter's chance, and we saw it a couple years ago. Beavers came up just a little bit short, and the fact that the three of us can still talk about Sony DeShera and Auburn, these few years later shows just how close it was. And, I think now we see the onus of needing to get a national seed, right? So the Beavers are already in the hosting picture. They're already looking great as a regional host. That's top 16. Barring something unforeseen, they're going to be in that mix. But getting into the top 8, fellas, man, I wanted to talk to you guys and podcast with you so much on this. Can we give some West Coast fairness in baseball? Look at the top 8 national seeds, folks. SEC, 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 ACC. I mean, I get it. It is the mecca of college baseball. I'm not tone deaf. But man, even in all those great years, you still had a couple West Coast hosting sites. I mean, the SEC AC bias is real in this thing, fellas. It's real. Let's just start there.
Yeah, as somebody from a former ACC state in Virginia, yeah, even to UVA it has not been that spectacular overall, and they were
Right.
at one point in that picture of top
They
8
were?
seed.
Oh, yeah.
So that's something where yeah, it just I don't think the top 8 is necessarily an accurate representation of what this baseball season has been for a lot of these teams. I think it's everybody trying to figure out postseason who's going to rise above the pack and being able to make it to Omaha. But for the Beavers in this case, I'm like, just win. Like
Right.
Al
That's
Davis,
all you
just
can do.
win. Just win. That's all you need. As long as you get to that, and if that's the goal to set you up for a trip to Omaha, just win. That's all that matters. No matter how you do it. You win ugly, cool. You win but in a dominant manner, cool. But that's how you just got to get to that point at the end of this season. Yeah.
Yeah, I've kind of done the math, and just based on previous national seeds and all those things, Ryan, and the fact that, I'll just be honest with everybody listening. The Beavers have less margin for error being an independent team this year, period. Like, you've just seen it. And I hate to say, like, they're against Oregon State kind of a thing, but I'm telling you, if Oregon State gives this committee any reason to not be a national seed, they'll give a national seed to the ACC or the SEC. That's just the way that it works. So the Beavers have to truly leave no doubt. So that's why, I'm texting you guys this week. That's why these Gonzaga games, the midweek Portland games against Gonzaga, you have to stack wins. I think Oregon State can have roughly 12 or 13 losses and be in that mix, maybe a hair or two less, but probably no more than that. Which means, you need to ball out the rest of the year. And again, going back to the no room for error, D1 baseball, which I think is the best representation of college baseball. Kendall Rogers, Aaron Fitt, some of my favorite dudes in the sport. They're great, and they do a great job. They've got Oregon State as the seventh seed right now. It's probably accurate, and I think it's probably accurate of where a committee would put them right now. Baseball America has them as the 9. I think that's probably a little underseeding. But again, to know that they're kind of in that mix, and just right now, we posted it this week, a hypothetical regional right now would have Oregon, Fairfield, and Gonzaga in that. So it's very likely, just with the way that travel works in baseball, if Oregon State's one of those few West Coast hosting sites, maybe it's them, maybe it's UCLA, maybe it's Irvine, whoever it is, you're going to get any of those decent West Coast teams that don't travel in your regional, i.e. Oregon, i.e. Gonzaga, i.e. UC Santa Barbara, Cal Poly, who we played earlier this year. So, it's obviously still very early on, but I'm kind of with Ryan. Brogan, I think you just have to stack wins. And starting this weekend, the non-conference game against Oregon on Tuesday is a little less important as far as the win-loss go, but you're down in Eugene against a team who's on the bubble of hosting themselves. You got to take 2 or 3 this weekend. You have to do it. Have to find a way.
Yeah, I think after that first Irvine game and with West Virginia losing, we do hold the longest win streak in the nation right now. But we played 4 straight against Oregon and then go back to Abe Arquette's hometown in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I think we need at least 3 against the Ducks. You want to sweep them. Need the game against Hawaii. Like you were saying, there's no conference tournament for the Beavs this year, so you don't really have any extra opportunity to win more games at the end. It'll be interesting to see how that Big Ten tournament shakes out for the rest of the regional, whether you get the Ducks, you get Iowa, some other team like that to come down to the Corvallis regional. But like you said, you just need to keep winning, keep stacking wins, and that's really all you can do. Just prove that you belong.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, Ryan. Brogan mentioned that the lack of a conference tournament, that even adds
Yeah.
even more of the onus. Like you talk about, there's 2 midweek games against Portland. Brogan mentioned 4 games against Hawaii. Like the unfortunate part, and it's not unfortunate because it's actually good, but kind of just the reality is there's no pushovers left on the schedule. That was respectfully Cal State Northridge and their 8 wins. Like Long Beach State isn't Long Beach State level this year. They're not elite, but they're still more than capable. Iowa, last I checked, was leading the Big Ten. So, I know the Big Ten, haha, great baseball conference, all that. But nevertheless, that's still there and all that. But, I think just, Ryan, your last thoughts on the importance of this weekend here in the next 30 seconds, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I think this is big. It's also a rivalry game too, so even more high emotion in there. But yeah, you mentioned Aaron Fitt and Kendall Rogers. They both picked Oregon to win this series, this weekend series. So yeah,
we'll see.
that's
wrong.
there. But I do think though that there's going to be that kind of charged emotion with a rivalry game, and I think too, just stacking wins because you can't really overlook anybody at all. Even for this one too, it's like, yeah, Oregon hasn't played the strongest opponents, but can't overlook them. You gotta be on your P's and Q's in this series.
Yeah, and I have no doubt Mitch Canham, knowing what he's, they'll be ready for their rivals, no doubt. But it's going to be a great series. You can catch all those updates on BeaversEdge.com. Appreciate Ryan, Harlan, Brogan Slaughter for joining me on this edition of the podcast. We'll be back at some point soon talking some more Beaver baseball and more. Appreciate you guys, and thanks to everyone for tuning in to this edition of the Edge Podcast.